Thanks, Sean. Is that working okay? Yeah, that sounds fine. Yeah, good afternoon. Well, the last talk we saw was a fairly long-established exercise. This is brand new, something we've dreamt up in the last year, I guess, maybe. A little bit of background about it. And I was telling a few folk this over coffee. It arose from, I was invited to a Findhorn Arts Festival about 3 years ago, pre-COVID, I think. And at that festival, I met an artist who has developed a water organ, which is a very curious thing. It sits in the river and plays music. Debbie, are you here yet? Chaps from the Nith, I believe. You may know him. Mark Sidalgo, yeah. And I had to do a talk to a very artistically orientated audience, which was an experience for me and an experience from them, sure, as well. But it was great. At that conference, I met somebody who was extremely interested in the Findhorn. And her name was Elle Adams, and she was a very able fundraiser, and that led to this project starting off called the Findhorn Watershed Initiative. So I'm going to introduce the project to you over the next few slides. Go the other one. Got it. Two people responsible for it, myself there on the left, looking old and grumpy and as usual. And that's Elle there, who I met at the Arts Festival. And she's a very able fundraiser, as I say, and started looking at things a little differently for us, and hence this particular project. So what's it about? Well, we're still working on a bit of a vision statement and what have you, but it's a coordinated action for ecosystem restoration at a watershed scale. We had deliberately avoided using catchment because nobody in the general public knows anything about catchments, and watershed seemed to be a slightly better word, but that's what we're after. That's the Findhorn catchment there. It sort of splits into 3 zones. And the great beauty of the Findhorn is that, unlike other rivers we've been hearing about today, there's no obstructions in it. It's generally quite natural. So it's actually, well, we consider it a bit of a stronghold for salmon and trout in the area. Compared to the 2 other rivers I work on either side, they're much more affected by human activities. We've split it into these 3 areas. I'm not going to go through them all in detail, but it gives you a flavour of what we're trying to do. It's a much wider scope thing than anything we've done with the Trust before. Starting at the upper catchment, we're very much looking at woodland restoration. That's our key driver, but we're involved in some peatland stuff a little bit, floodplain stuff and various other things. Middle catchments where we start to see hogweed and knotweed appear, and we've been strongly involved in that over the years. There's a great interest to see if there's pearl mussels still in the river. We're looking into that at the moment, a few other areas. And quite interesting, at the bottom end of the river too, we've just submitted an application for seagrass meadow restoration. At least see if that's feasible in that lower area. So we're beginning to broaden our aspect for the Trust considerably, rather than simply being a fish-orientated organisation. Another strong thing, and something we've learned through our CC project, which some of you will be familiar with, control and hogweed and knotweed, is community involvement. I'm not going to run through the whole thing, it's pretty obvious by the slide there, but getting the community on side, landowners on side, farmers, foresters, that's central to this initiative, and we spent quite a lot of time working on that, and we'll be spending a lot more time working on that as well to make sure that we get that buy-in and support. So it's again much wider than we've actually operated before. And then down the other side there, just a checklist really of the things that we're going to try and aim and explore over the duration of this initiative, which we hope will be a much longer term thing. But we started in the upper catchment, and the big thing in the upper catchment, and it should come as no surprise to most of you with highland rivers, is that there's actually very little trees left. It's at least very little natural trees anyway. So that seemed like a really good area to start. There's also a big peatland initiative going on in the upper Findhorn catchment, as we discovered. Work there is well advanced of anywhere else in Scotland, and many of the upland peatland drains have now been blocked up, and Landowners are beginning to see change already. Less flashy spates, for instance, water being a bit clearer. There's not much data on that, admittedly, but they just feel that it's actually gone well. And they're now beginning to look at other things because some of their natural sporting activities are not paying them much money anymore. And they're looking to diversify, and regeneration of woodland with carbon capture added into it. It's a pretty good avenue to go down at the moment. So we've spent a lot of time engaging with the upper landowners, and we're also now starting to engage with the local community, although it's quite small up there. That's what it looks like. You can see on the right-hand side there is some remnant forest. Mostly Scots pine, alder, some willows, and montane species. But it's pretty darn bare, and not much biodiversity up there at all. Largely cleared 200 years ago for sheep, and then deer stalking, grouse shooting. But as I mentioned, some of those activities are less lucrative than they've been in the past, so it's quite a good time to try and get some change underway. Our route into this, though, has been salmon. And I blame Ian Malcolm for this a lot, actually. It's salmon and temperature, but you know that the temperature map that you've managed to create with Faye and others, Ian, and many of us have been involved, it has really helped drive this. And I'd make no mistake about it. It gets through to these guys that we need some cover to create shade. I mean, this is, you know, most of you'll know this, that there's temperature limits for salmon and trout, and it varies which paper you read, but it's round about 22 degrees, 19 degrees, they start to get in real difficulties. This year in the Findhorn, or last year rather, in the Findhorn, when we were surveying, we had 20 degrees in the main stem. So now that it was several degrees higher in the tributaries. You could comfortably swim in it. It was no problem at all. It's not like that every year, of course, but it's becoming more frequent. And what's also worrying is the spawning aspect. You know, I noticed, and I got this out of the electrofishing manual, I think, 78 degrees for spawning, for eggs to survive and thrive. If it goes higher than that, they get into serious difficulties very, very quickly. We were counting reds in November last year, and 10 degrees in our t-shirts. It's just ridiculous. You know, salmon really don't have much chance. That was on a much lower area, admittedly. So this sort of message gets through to landowners actually quite quickly, and they seem to be able to try and sort of grasp this. So we've gone in and made no apologies for going in with this attitude. Looking at the Findhorn specifically, that's a sort of highlight from one of the temperature maps that Ian and his team have prepared, and nearly all, well, 50% of the Findhorn is subject to concern regarding rising temperatures if it keeps going the same way. High risk, and it's probably a lot higher actually if you just scale it down to the upper area that you're looking at there. So all those upper tributaries are in threat, and no trees really to shade them whatsoever. Are they any good for salmon? Somebody mentioned something about using a NEPS benchmark earlier today. I was a wee bit ahead of the game on that. They are very good for salmon, most of them for salmon fry and par. They're not great for trout, admittedly, but they're very good for salmon, and nearly in most instances exceed the benchmark that we're after for NEPS. So they're very important rearing areas for salmon. And again, we're finding that landowners seem to engage with this, the community seem to engage with it, and they get that picture quite quickly. And you can see behind the graph there that, you know, again, that particular tributary, the Mazarin, no tree cover really there whatsoever. It ties in with our management plan, which we rejigged in 2021. And we had 6 key factors in that management plan. And number 1 is climate crisis, climate change, and how that might be affecting the river. So it tied in with that. The initiative really draws on that and pushes our management plan forward. So benefits of riverwoods. Again, I think most of the audience here will know this quite well, but increasing shading should reduce river temperatures, should allow us to protect those, or at least future generations to protect those fish. Should improve river habitat, because some of that up there is not fantastic. There's likely to be improvements in terms of erosion and flood risk. All fairly standard things, but also increasing nutrients, and that's something I think that we don't sell enough. The nutrient load going into the river up there is pretty poor. It would certainly increase that, and probably increase that quite rapidly, and also soil quality as well, and indeed runoff. But also shelter out with the river for other animals and species. Getting away from fish for a second, it will improve that considerably for existing deer populations, but also many other animals, and perhaps create biodiversity corridors and the like as well. So we're trying to look at it a much wider pattern. And then there's this thing called carbon sequestering. It's an important move for that as well, and allows landowners developing forestry plans and communities doing that to tie into that type of funding stream. It also fits in with some of the bigger goals in Scotland in terms of the government aims, 30-30, net zero and biodiversity goals. So it's flavour of the month at the moment. And again, we're finding people are embracing that and looking at this type of thing and asking us to go forward with this. So it's generally quite positive. What can we expect to see? It would be nice to show some Findhorn pictures here, but this is some examples from the borders. That was 1999, before they started a fairly major exercise there in terms of regeneration. And that's 2022. So in the space of 20 odd years, or a bit more, 40 years or so, you can see a significant change. So you can do it in a generation to start to see change and get even more people engaged. And I would imagine that one on the right now is a much richer environment than where they started. So progress so far, I hasten to add, we're really at the start line here. We only really got going with this at the tail end of last year, or sort of middle of last year. Set up a steering group, which was always a good idea, and made sure that was relatively reflective of things other than just rivers and fish. And we're still adding to that group. We have now just passed the 1 million funding mark last week, which is fantastic, but comes with it a whole set of other problems. I've never handled as much funding, and I spent all of yesterday speaking to accountants. So that's the sort of change you have to envisage when you get into these projects, and the sort of cash flow issues that you start to experience become a real headache. But I'd rather have that headache than no money at all. We are seeking to appoint a project officer, and that just closed the other week, and we have 4 reasonable applicants. Among a number of others, and we think we'll certainly have somebody in place next month. And we've had some really quite challenging landowner meetings. In fact, we met them all in London quite recently, since most of them are based there, and gave them a nice lunch and basically hammered out some agreements with them, and we seem to get reasonable buy-in, at least from 4 of the 5 we met. And we've got another 5 in the upper catchment to meet over the next few weeks. We're now moving from that sort of aspirational side to practical side and help develop river forestry plans over the next year. And that's our key aim, is to develop each estate with a plan for woodland. Some have them already. We're looking to fill in some of their gaps, and some we're starting from scratch, and some, frankly, one's not buying into it at all. So we'll just move around them and work around that. But in the future, they'll come on board. We're also looking for novel approaches. We've had quite a number of things suggested to us, such as collecting up seeds from the lower end of the river and dropping them in the upper river, since there's no trees there. Let's artificially stimulate that, see if we can get around some of the deer grazing issues. So we're looking to try some stuff like that. Other things we've talked about, even taking whole trees and transplant them into sheltered areas. Nothing's off the table at the moment. Some of those things are probably not practical once we speak to foresters, but I think you just need to sort of sharpen up and have some different ideas, rather than the same old, oh, the deer's the problem, we need to build a fence. Because not everybody likes fences. Problem areas, well, getting landowner buy-in. We have one who is really quite adamantly against the whole idea, and she will not budge. So we'll have to dream up something a bit more enthusiastic, a bit more approachable for her. And as I mentioned, actually just managing the whole thing's proven to be a fair headache, actually. And there's plenty more to do beyond that. So that's just a brief introduction. Hopefully I'll return in a year or 2's time and let you know what's happening and how far we've gone. Okay, thanks very much, Sean.
Cheers, Bob. So we're going to go for a quick cut right now, as this is quite a long one, but we're doing quite good on time actually. So we'll reconvene at 3:10 for our final two talks, and then everyone's free to go home. So yeah, go grab a cup of tea, stretch your legs, and we'll see you back at 10 past.